Is this thing on?
Hi.
Hello?
Is this thing on?
Hi, is this thing on?
Is this thing on?
Is this thing on?
Hi, is this thing on? Are we open?
Welcome to Open Ed Mic, a podcast where voices from across the educational landscape share insights, stories, and strategies for transforming learning through openness. Whether you're new to open education or a seasoned practitioner, Open Ed Mic invites you into the conversation. Let's hear who's joining us today. Mike?
Hello, everyone. It's Mike Mills. After 35 years in higher ed, I am now doing what I want when I want during the week. So glad to see all of you again.
Kevin?
I am not Mike Mills, and I don't get to do everything I want. I am representing the University of Central Florida in sunny Orlando, Florida.
Zach?
Hi, everybody. It's Zach Kleiboff from Dominican University, just outside of Chicago, Illinois, and it is a very foggy day.
And I am Brittany Dudek with the Colorado Community College System in Denver, Colorado. So today's guest is Daniel Williamson, who oversees OpenStax initiative at Rice University, one of the most influential and widely adopted open educational resource efforts in the world. OpenStax has helped redefine access and affordability in higher education, providing high-quality and peer-reviewed textbooks to millions of learners while saving students billions of dollars. But OpenStax is more than a cost-saving solution. It represents a model of how community-driven scholarship, institutional mission, and scalable infrastructure can intersect to transform learning. Daniel's leadership comes at a pivotal moment. Artificial intelligence is reshaping how students access information. Extended reality technologies are redefining immersive learning. Microlearning models are challenging traditional course structures. And the lines between community-driven content and vendor-supported learning platforms continue to blur. At the center of this sits a fundamental question: what becomes of the textbook? Daniel's work invites us to think beyond static PDFs and towards a future where open content remains trusted, adaptable, and deeply human, even as technology accelerates around it. We're thrilled to have a leader who is helping to shape what the next generation of learning materials might become. Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So we are really interested in what drew you to OpenStax and your open education work. Was there like a moment that you realized that textbooks and the systems around them maybe needed some reimagining?
So the real answer to that question is no.
Love that.
Which is kind of an interesting, I guess, origin story for me. So I actually went to undergrad at Rice, which is where OpenStax is based. My undergrad was in opera performance, so very far afield. As I was going through undergrad about my junior year, I said, I'm not sure that opera performance is exactly what I want to do with my life. And the entire time that I was in undergrad, I was also doing like web development stuff on the side in order to pay for beer. Don't tell my mom. And when I went to graduate, or when I was graduating, I was like, I probably need to figure out a way to continue to feed myself. I didn't want to rush into grad school. I wanted to do something that was going to be interesting, but also I had to realize, or came to the realization that it was 2008. So it was the height of the recession. Jobs were not super plentiful, especially not in opera performance. And so I did what I do a lot, which is I talked to a ton of people. And I talked to my boss at the time at the place I was doing a lot of this, beer money work. And she told me I needed to talk to Sydney Burris and Rich Baranick. And they were basically the founders of Connections, which was the precursor project to OpenStax. So they started telling me about this project, about creating, freely available open educational modules and open source. And a lot of it was kind of like over my head, but I was like, these people seem really smart. I should probably take the time and learn from them. And so they gave me my first summer job after college. And it was basically using XML to create textbooks and other types of learning materials in Connections. So very much like grunt labor. But where everything started to take a bit of a pivot was around on April 1st, 2009. So a year after I'd been there, Rich and Sydney decided they liked me long enough or keep me long enough to stay a year. But on April 1st, I got a call from Sydney and he said, "Hey, Daniel, do you have a passport?" And I said, "Yes. Is this an April Fool's joke?" And he said, "No, Jonathan's son broke his leg and I need you to go to Istanbul tomorrow." And I was like, this has to be an April Fool's joke. Like, there's no possible way this is not an April Fool's joke. So I'm convinced. I walk into the office and I talk to some other people in the office and I'm like, so I'm going to, I heard I'm going to Istanbul tomorrow. And sure enough, it wasn't a joke. And I was on my way to Istanbul the following day to give 3 talks about open education that I'd never done before to a bunch of people in Istanbul. And it was just crazy because what happened after I got over the shock and the jet lag and all that stuff was I gave these probably worst talks of my life to a bunch of different folks that I never met, and told them about connections, about open education. And afterwards, people came up to me and they said, "Thank you so much for the work that you are doing. Because of you, I found an Algebra 1 resource that I could use to teach my students." And I was just like, wait, hold on. So that XML coding I was doing in a cubicle on Kirby Drive in Houston is having an impact on people around the world. And it immediately became this fire in my heart. Like, I said, this is what I should do with the rest of my life. I should be figuring out how to expand access. I should be figuring out how to help people. And I believe that education is the vehicle that actually helps people drive opportunity in their life. And so that's what I've been doing ever since. And
is there an opera book?
Yes, that was my
coming
follow-up
out
question.
Shortly.
Man, I wish there was an opera book coming out. In the Connections days, I actually created a bunch of opera or music modules that were there. Mm-hmm. But I don't think there's going to be an opera book immediately in the near future at OpenStax, unfortunately.
I think, Daniel, all your answers should be sung for this podcast.
Oh, is that right? Well, for that, I charge.
As you should.
So I had a quick question, and this, really focuses in around that question of the textbook. So we've really long treated the textbook as this stable, bounded object. What's the biggest shift that you see happening right now in how students and faculty think about course materials and think about what we've known as the existing textbook?
That's a fantastic question. And frankly, it's been one that we've been grappling with since I've been at OpenStax. So the textbook was not the initial vision for what we were going to create. Back in the Connections days, the ideas were really that we wanted to have these modular learning objects that we could take and stack, and the person who's the expert in this one area would create that module, and then you'd pull it over and combine it with the thing that you were an expert on, right? It wasn't meant to be this kind of monolithic tome. But what we kind of realized as we started trying to popularize the use of these open educational resources is that there was this kind of form factor that people were really comfortable with. And when I say people, I mean instructors. And they were comfortable with the textbook. And so we actually conformed to that form in the transition to OpenStax and creating these digital textbooks, something that had this full scope and sequence that had the various ancillaries that came along with it. But I think you're right to point out that today there is a significant shift happening. One big shift, I think, is that from all of the talks that I have had with faculty members across the world, students don't read the textbook. I mean, I don't know if any of you have had that same experience, but most of them are saying it is like pulling teeth to get them to read something, and I'm having to rethink how I engage my students. So I think now a lot of faculty are thinking about that engagement factor. Like, how do I pull students into this? How do I make something that maybe previously was really exciting to them as instructors? How do I make that exciting to this generation? So we're starting to think a little bit more back in the way that we thought about connections, about it being these learning objects that could be reassembled and customized and personalized depending upon the specific context that that instructor and that student are in, and also giving them the tools to take advantage of things like AI to adapt it on the fly so that it doesn't have to be this giant intimidating tome of learning content, but rather it can be something that's more accessible, more, bespoke for each individual student. So I think that's a big change that's happening. And I mean, you look at some of the stuff that's coming out of big tech companies like Google, and like they have this Learn Your Way product. I think there's a lot of push in that direction. I think one of the big questions is, how do we do that in a way that is truly scalable and also takes advantage of the expertise that we have in our faculty and gets rid of some of the grunt labor that maybe would free up faculty members and other instructors to do the things that they love, which is to teach.
So Daniel, I'm curious. I mean, I've been having some of these conversations within my university setting and across about Generation Z, Generation Alpha, and whether there's a shrinking of attention spans, whether it's, social media, mobile phones, whatever the case may be. But there's still the necessity for long-form reading or long-form viewing. And so while there's these pressures to change the textbook format, there's still going to be War and Peace in its full form. Have you had conversations at OpenStax on how do you build more engagement in long-form reading? Is it something like hypothesis? Is it perusal? Is it something else?
We've definitely had conversations around this, but I don't think we have a solution yet. I would say that the things you point out, like ideas around having content interjected into the long form reading through something like hypothesis, creating more types of like project-based learning that turn an activity into something that's not just perceived as preparation, but is actually the result in and of itself, if that makes sense. So like not just doing work for work's sake, but actually having a problem that you're trying to solve, and then using these kind of long form resources in order to kind of help you solve and engage with the project. I think those are things that we're really interested in. The other thing that we're interested in is like, how do we take advantage of new technologies like AI to make things feel more like a conversation? I mean, we could talk for hours and hours and hours and hours and hit on tons and tons of different topics, but it would also force us to kind of go back and reassess our answers. We'd have to pull on resources that we have previously read. We'd have to pull on things, or you might push me to think about something that I haven't yet read. All right. And I think when it becomes relevant and real and something that means something to students and sparks their curiosity, I think that's where we start to see that real drive and engagement, because we've now established relevancy. And so I think that's the biggest thing that we have to sort of solve for, is the why. Why should a student care about this thing? Why should they be engaging? And then use the tools that we have available at our disposal to help drive that relevancy even further.
I love it. How do we ground it?
Exactly.
Daniel, I want to continue on this AI discussion. And you had recently written that AI in education is only as good as the content it's built on. We know that faculty are using AI to summarize chapters, generate explanations, create practice questions, create images. What's the role of OpenStax in this era where information is abundant, but authority and trust may be harder to establish?
Yeah, I mean, it is a question and a issue that I deal with every single day. I've been fortunate over the last few years to work very closely with a bunch of the frontier model providers, thinking about how they ground their content in trusted OpenStax content. We've had everybody from Microsoft to Google and many others in between coming to us and saying, wow, this is an incredible knowledge base, not just in terms of like the content that's there, but also how it's connected together. Because a lot of what they're looking for is how do we make sure that what we're presenting to students is pedagogically appropriate, that it will help them learn, not just get the answer. And so from like a sort of bigger picture perspective, how does open sort of play into the future, especially when it comes to AI? I will say that there needs to be a re-examining of the economics of the internet. If we look at how a lot of these models kind of gobble up a lot of the educational content that exists in the space without necessarily contributing back, I fear that we're going to create a vacuum, that people are going to say, I'm no longer willing to contribute to open anything, because all I know what's going to happen is it's just going to get eaten up, and the big companies are going to get richer, and I'm not going to see any credit for it. If you look at like one of our peers, Wikipedia, what Wikipedia has done is they've said, we're still going to keep everything open, but we're going to design specific API pathways for Google or whomever else to access our resources. And they have to pay for that. And it's by evaluating what they really care about, the companies that is, and they care about relevancy, they care about speed. They want to use this as like a signal for how the market might be shifting and changing. And I think that's an interesting model. That might not work for open textbooks, right? Because we don't want open textbooks necessarily changing every single moment, every single day. We need a little bit of consistency. So how could open textbooks or other open educational resources that may not be as massive as Wikipedia or other databases like that, how can we signal to them what's valuable to us and how we can collaborate to make sure that we're continuing to create quality knowledge that grounds their models and makes their tools better, while still receiving some form of support or remuneration or credit, whichever that might be, that's most important to us. How can we make sure that this is a partnership, not just an extraction model?
So, Daniel, what you're saying actually reminds me of that period of time a little while ago in open, when there were all of those publishers grabbing all of that open content and then reselling it, right? And that really kind of resonates with me with what you're saying here about ingesting all of the OER and then repackaging it and selling it. And I could see kind of that same thing here, because we had so many instructors and faculty saying, well, why should I participate in creating open content when publishers or vendors may just take it and sell it back to students? And I could see that same exact argument being made in this here. And what would you say to, like, how would you answer those people, those instructors, those creators who might say, well, we had that happen before and now it's going to happen again. And there may be, another phase that's going to just keep taking the work and reselling it, or, grabbing it and just using it. What do you say to that?
I think one, it's a deeply personal question that each individual is going to have to grapple with. I can speak about it from OpenStax perspective, mm-hmm. right? So OpenStax has always been a proponent of having an ecosystem of resources, an ecosystem of add-on services around our core content. And the reason why we wanted to do that was because we felt that all of the people who would choose to use OpenStax would have a lot of different needs. Some might be totally okay with just having the textbook. Some might be okay with having the textbook with some ancillary materials like slide decks or test banks. Some might need something more. They might need like a full adaptive courseware platform to use with their products. And so the way that OpenStax approached that was, we said, we want you to take and use our stuff, and we also want to figure out if there's a way for us to actually partner around that. So what we created was this technology partnership program. We have a bunch of different companies that participate in this technology partnership program, and they provide back to OpenStax. So they actually, when an instructor decides to use one of these resources in their classroom, when a student purchases a low-cost license to one of these, a portion of that comes back to support OpenStax to keep that content up to date. Now, I recognize that OpenStax is in a unique position relative to an individual faculty member who may have produced some open resource. But I do think that there's an opportunity perhaps in the open education ecosystem to come together and say, like, let's band together, let's form some sort of collective bargaining establishment that goes out and represents our interest and works to help support us. If you look at open education, intentionally, it's like highly fragmented, which is it can be great, right? It can be great for innovation. It can be great for each of us to like sort of own an interesting portion of the work, right? But what it also creates is opportunity for that extractive economy where we don't have as strong of a voice. So when I'm the founding treasurer of the Open Education Association that was launched back at the end part of last year. And one of the reasons I wanted to get involved and was supportive of Nicole Allen and others moving in this direction is I think, frankly, open education needs to professionalize. Open education needs to have a stronger unified voice in order to address big issues like this. Because OpenStax is very fortunate. We are, relatively well resourced. We're able to speak to companies like Google regularly and say, hey, if you're going to take this, it'd be great if you contribute back. But as an individual, we might not have as strong of a voice. And so I think we need to bind together, not just around this particular issue, but about all the issues that we're facing, including things like funding. I mean, the funding landscape is shifting right now a lot. Who's speaking up for us in the halls of government saying this is important and this is having this impact? Who's at the chancellor level or at the provost level saying, hey, have you thought about the impact that open education could be having? I mean, they meet regularly in their own closed halls. Can we get in there and can we have a voice present? I think we have to be thinking about it bigger than our individual interest and thinking about it as the bigger group interest or community interest. I like community better.
And I think kudos to you for being part of that, because I do think that there has to be sort of the professionalization of the open movement. Well, not a movement, it's the open field at this point. I want to transition a little bit away from the AI conversation and broaden it a little bit, because AI has been all-consuming for all conversations, and it seems to be the default emerging technology. But there are others, and I'm curious on how you, OpenStax, your colleagues, determine what might fit within your ecosystem. And particularly, there's been some real gains within the XR environment, so augmented reality, virtual reality, and how it can be modularized. And we were just talking a little bit before about how do you make long-form reading or viewing more interactive, and how do you make an immersive learning experience? Has there been any conversation within OpenStax about either going in and looking at open simulations that already exist and how to incorporate that within the framework you have, or expanding your footprint to have these VR experiences be part of the DNA for OpenStax?
So I would say the conversations are relatively nascent. Our focus is around driving engagement at this point, right? Like we recognize as primarily known as a textbook publisher, like we have to evolve. We have to be looking at how we make those things more engaging. In terms of like virtual reality and XR, we have talked with many various companies that provide services like this. Like one of them is called Alchemy, and they have like these molecular drawings. We're working on incorporating those into the resources that we provide. And of course, going way back when, it's not really VR, but like PhET, like the PhET simulations. Those, in our very first book that we published, College Physics, we incorporated those right away. So I think you're totally right that as this technology continues to scale and become more affordable, and also, let's be frank, like AI makes it a much more affordable process to develop these resources. I can't imagine that OpenStax would be able to ignore it, nor would we want to ignore it. We want to make sure that we're creating the most engaging and powerful resources that we possibly can, and make sure that they're available and accessible to everyone. So I think VR and AR are definitely like on the pathway. In terms of exactly when, I don't have an answer to that question.
If you did, I was going to ask you for your winning lottery numbers for tomorrow.
7, 8, and 9.
So I work in community colleges, and our focus is often on like workforce development and how we can support our workforce partners. And right now that's taking a lot of shape in like micro-credentialing and those types of things. And, the comments you made earlier about how your OpenStax, maybe kind of shifting back to the origins and looking at kind of like like learning objects and modular learning. Is there any talk or thoughts in looking at like stackable credentials, any types of microlearning or anything like that, and where OpenStax may fit into that kind of workforce development credentialing ecosystem?
Yeah, it is the topic du jour for sure. I mean, well, actually, let's say that's the topic du jour along with AI and everything else that we've already talked about.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think one of the big, I don't know if this is really a shift, but one of the big kind of current talking points that we're hearing throughout society is education worth it, right? And unless higher education can prove that value, I think it's going to be an uphill battle in terms of like continuing to have students want to come to college and want to engage. And when we look at kind of our opportunities to contribute positively in that direction, I think that micro-credentials and stackable learning opportunities make a ton of sense. We want to be where the students are, and I think that's where students are heading. One of the challenges, I've brought up a lot of times in various open educational contexts is that open has to be where the educators are. We have to be serving educators. We have to be understanding their needs. We need to be focused on making their lives easier and better, right? And so when I start talking with faculty members, when I go out to community not just community colleges, honestly, when I go out to any college, they are thinking about micro-credentials. They are thinking about how they help students develop workforce-ready skills. They're trying to connect with industry. And one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is actually the future of general education. If you look at like general education as it was originally conceived, the idea was that this core sequence of courses was going to be compiled at a particular school, and it was going to be designed to prepare that student for whatever they were going to do next, and like whatever field of study they were going to go down. But it was like the core that they had to have in order to do all these new things. But over like the past, I don't know, probably 50 years, general education has actually become more of like this checkbox that I have to have in order to move on to the courses that actually mean something for my future. There's been a huge amount of outsourcing of general education, and I don't mean that negatively. I mean, it's just we're trying to be more efficient. So it's been outsourced to advanced placement. It's been outsourced to dual enrollment courses. And what that means is there's this lack of coherency in like what we're trying to do, but it also means that it gives us an opportunity to have relevancy baked in earlier. If we take an active approach at rethinking what general education could be, could we expose students to more of those workforce ready skills earlier on? So even if they end up not going whatever path they thought they were going to go on when they first started out, they still leave with something that's valuable and tangible. So one of the like dreams of mine, and I'm not promising OpenStax is going to do this anytime soon, is that we can actually have a moment to step back and pull together the stakeholders from community colleges to workforce providers to our four-year partners to like U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation kind of people, and say like, what does a 22nd century, I know we're not there yet, but 22nd century general education really look like? Like, what are those things that students actually need to be successful? And can we make sure that it's not just about academic performance, but it's academic performance and workforce readiness? Yeah, I've been like chomping at the bit to like figure out if we can pull together some sort of project like that, because I think it would be incredibly valuable. And like from an OpenStax perspective, if we can't be part of that conversation and designing what it looks like, we're going to be chasing it on the development side on the back end.
Okay, well, count me in on that conversation. I'll help. I'm very interested in that as well.
Daniel, when I was taking my gen ed courses so many years ago, one of the things that disinterested me was that there was no relevancy, that what you're talking about, right? So, building in that experiential learning into those gen ed courses, I think will go a long way. To do that, does OpenStax see itself going back to its origins where people are creating modules instead of just larger singular authors of books?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think so. So we launched a new product like really last year called Assignable. And what part of what Assignable was working to do is to like not disintegrate, basically turn all of our textbooks into pieces that you can then assign how you want. But like the vision beyond that is like, we know that's just step one. What are the other things that you want to plug in? What are the other perhaps, workforce ready skills modules that you want to plug in and where? And how can we make it really simple and easy for you to be able to assemble this nice package that then goes to your students? They know exactly what to do. It helps you see where they're performing well, where they aren't performing well, and then make adaptations as you go along. So I do think like we definitely are thinking about more modularization. I think we're thinking less about whole textbooks, although we still probably will be developing more whole textbooks. But I think we'll be even more intentional in the design that these textbooks aren't just going to be used contiguously, but they need to be able to be pulled apart and reshaped depending upon the context.
So even though we've been talking a lot about, the future of the, quote unquote textbook, or the future of, learning and creating modular things and stuff like that, and which is all stuff that I think is really where things are progressing, I kind of want to take a step back and just look at the current state of things. So at your core, OpenStax is a textbook publisher. And it operates in this market that is dominated by these really significant corporations like McGraw-Hill, Cengage, and Pearson. And they have, I'm guessing, significantly more resources at their disposal. So I guess my big question is, how does OpenStax really maintain and grow market share in that type of competitive environment when, just to throw out something that a bookstore manager told me a few years ago when we were talking about open education, he said that the problem with OER isn't that you don't have, a really viable product here. The problem is that you don't have an entire sales team pushing it. So anyways, just along those kind of lines, just kind of curious, how you think about this.
I mean, it's a fantastic question, and one that we've had since I've been at OpenStax. And, I think the biggest point that I would make is that we are very lucky that we do have a huge sales force. It just happens not to be employed by OpenStax. We have a whole community of librarians and educators and administrators who are pushing for greater affordability, and they push for OpenStax. We've been very fortunate. I mean, OpenStax has over 6 million current term students who are using our resources, And the reason why that growth has happened isn't because we have a sales force, but it's or an internal sales force. It's because we built strong relationships with everybody in the open education community, and they act as the amplifier, making sure that people know that this is available. Now, the thing that I would say is a challenge, and that is something that I think the open education community needs to continue to bind together to work on, is that we are overall as a community and OpenStax still highly reliant on philanthropic or governmental support. And what that means is that we can often sort of have to please multiple stakeholders, whether it's, the stakeholder of the funder or the stakeholder of the instructor and students that we are serving. And I really hope that we can figure out a way that we can build a sustainability model that allows us to squarely focus on the student, because that's the way that we become dominant. That's the way that we become the best, is when we have the best product and we have the clarity of focus that allows us just to drive forward, putting the student front and center, and not worrying as much about going after the next grant. Now, shout out to all of the OpenStax funders. Love them all to death. They are amazing. We couldn't have done what we've done without you. You've done nothing wrong. It's just that it's a whole nother operation that we have to do when we have to go, chase philanthropic funding. And, wouldn't it be so much better if we had some sort of internal mechanism that allowed us to continue to move forward and chase the needs of the students rather than worrying about where the next grant's going to come from?
I want to say it was about maybe 2 years ago that I was harassing Nicole Allen, and I had actually gone and got pricing for this, that we should do a billboard campaign across the United States. It's a ripoff on Got Milk. It just says Got Open. And obviously, she thought better of that and said no. So,
says the person who had the textbook pirate campaign back in the student purge days, where she had the big, I don't know if you've ever seen this, but this big caricature guy running around and attacking the textbook. I mean,
I've seen Nicole in butterfly costumes, the pirate. I'm surprised she wasn't in on the Got Open billboard.
Well, we'll ask her in August.
All right. Well, as we're wrapping up here, Daniel, I'm going to ask you, as we're thinking about, kind of where we're all headed in the future here, if someone were to ask you, what should we be prioritizing over the next 5 years or so, thinking about the future of course materials, what would you answer them?
I think we have to be prioritizing engagement, which I know is a very broad term, but in my thinking, engagement really looks at the transition from textbooks to engagement platforms, whether that's, within the learning management system, whether that's outside of the learning management system, and looks something more like courseware. I think we have to head there, because that's where students and instructors are really asking for more from us, from OpenStax. And I think that translates to what they need from the open community. We need stronger tools in order to engage our students more deeply. And when I mean tools, I mean a textbook as a tool. We need a way to turn that textbook and make it come alive for these students. And so I think we need to be investing a lot of energy there and driving deeper levels of engagement.
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, let me add one more thing.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
The way I think Open should be measuring engagement isn't just clicks and whatever. It should really be focused more on learning, right? So I often use the word engagement as a substitute for learning, but really that's what I mean. We need to be driving engagement, but engagement needs to be validated by how much more students are learning from the platforms and the resources that we are building.
Love that.
Well, Daniel, it's that time now for the really bad joke. And speaking of learning, as we have learned in these various episodes, these jokes are so horrendous that no one even wants to read them. So here we go. Why did the open textbook break up with the proprietary platform? Because it needed more space to share.
No.
Well, with that, the mic is closed.